And now we're looking at the world sort of post-COVID-19. How is it going to look? This is less a hard invest here or there. This is a lot more soft to it. But obviously, the investment themes and trends will come through to a degree. And I'm assuming a post-COVID-19 environment. I'm not saying what that is. Is it a cure? Is it antibodies? I don't know. A vaccine, and I don't know when it is. It's certainly not any time in the next couple of days, weeks. It's not this year, but certainly I'm trying to look out, where do we see things happening? What do they look like post it? And the first thing putting this presentation together that absolutely struck me was, imagine a COVID-19 pandemic and resulting lockdown without the internet. I mean, we must pause a moment and just remember, how fortunate we are that as a society this happens in 2020 when we have internet, when, we can all be sitting 100 plus of you on the webcast. We don't need to be at a venue. If this had happened 20 years ago, it would have been tough. If it happened 40 years ago, it would have just been infinitely harsher. I'm not saying this hasn't been tough. I'm saying thank goodness for the internet. The change in of itself is usually incremental. It doesn't happen suddenly. It's incremental. It's hard. It's typically resisted. People find change uncomfortable. We like the status quo, even if the status quo is not always necessarily great. We're worried about what's the other side. And the grass is green on the other side, but we still tend to stay on our side of the fence. So change in of itself usually happens very slowly, and lots of resistance to it because of that uncomfortableness to it. And an example here from Eric Brandjosfsson from MIT. I practiced that name and then I completely messed it when I did it. We'll call him Eric. The productivity J-curve. Companies are slow to adapt new technologies, and when they do, productivity actually dips at first. And the example he gives is electricity. It took over 30 years for electricity to make its way in a meaningful manner into factories and homes. And that's typically how change is. And he's obviously talking about companies, but I think it applies to a much broader sort of societal process as well. We are, and if you think about, the first iPhone came out, 13 years ago. And at that point, people had phones. There were Blackberries and the like. We go back 20 years, people didn't. And then it just sort of suddenly J-curves. Suddenly, everyone's got a smartphone. The candy bar phones, back in 2007 when the iPhone came out, most people still had a candy bar phone. A couple of Blackberries floating around, a few sort of quasi-smart devices. But it really was those candy bar phones, which, played Snake, sent SMS, and made phone calls. That was the point of them. It slowly gathers, and then it just absolutely takes off. And technology is the same. The difference here, what COVID-19 did, what the pandemic has done, is it forced change on us regardless. It forced us to live those changes, and those changes form habits. It wasn't a case of, where are we now? We're 1st of July. It was 4 months ago, less than 4 months ago, when South Africa had its first case. Go back 4 months, early March. The only region in lockdown was Wuhan, China. Italy was about to go into lockdown. France a little bit later. We did it towards the end of March, 27 March. But even that process, President Ramaphosa spoke on a Sunday evening, basically closed our borders, and it did a little bit. Literally following Monday, 8 days later, announced that Thursday midnight we were going into a hard lockdown. And it happened suddenly. And that makes the change different to what we're talking about in this productivity J-curve, in that this wasn't something we could opt out of. We are in it. And when I say we, more than half of this planet has been in some or other form of lockdown. Some of it fairly hard. South Africa, very hard lockdown. Wuhan, Italy, France, parts of Europe, very hard. Some of it, parts of the US, Northern Africa, the rest of us, parts of South America, less hard. But certainly we've had the change forced on us, and it is still coming. It is still coming thick and fast. The way we interact, the way we shop, the way we go to work, the way we move around, our inability to move around. June, this is the first June in memory for me that I didn't go to Durban, where it's nice and warm, and get some what they call winter in Durban, the rest of us call pleasant, sunny, warm days. So the fact that it's been forced on us is marked and matters, and I'm going to come back to it a fair bit. but also expect pushback. And we've seen pushback in the lockdown right since the beginning. During April, it was, what about the economy and all of that? And there's always going to be that pushback. There's always going to be resistance to change, even if ultimately the changes prove to be correct and right. And, how do we prove something correct and right is a debate on its own. But certainly the expectation is that there will be pushback. And we've seen some of that pushback already. We've seen it in the US with the insistence of opening, the refusal to wear masks and the like. We've seen it in South Africa with businesses pushing back. You can now go to casinos, restaurants and the like, limitations, but sort of things that were only expected to happen in level 1 suddenly happening in level 3 point something or other, which we find ourselves in early July. So what are some of those long-term changes going to be? I'm going to run through them. I'll touch on the details, and then we'll come back to them at the end and wrap up what I think are going to be the 3 key components that are going to be fundamentally different going forward. Obviously, work from home, or as Mr. Nair from Sasfin said on my show last week, live at work. And that's an important distinction. This is the biggest impact arriving out of COVID-19. And we've got to be very careful with that work from home or live at work. We've got to make sure that it's still a home environment with workspace, and I'll touch on that. But 50% of Americans work from home in April and May. That is unprecedented. I mean, that is just a crazy number. Now, a large slice of Americans also lost their jobs in April and May, and then a whole bunch continued on working. But the point is, most businesses never liked the idea of work from home. And I work with a bunch of corporates, and I'm not going to name names, but big corporates of, thousands, tens of thousands of staff. And the work from home was always like you can wear civvies on Friday or something like that. It wasn't even something which was being seriously entertained by top management. They just weren't interested. Then, of course, 27 March came. Work from home had to happen. If you wanted your business to carry on going, you either worked from home or you shut it down. And now I speak to those same top senior executives, man, and they quite like this work from home. They like it from a personal perspective, but actually, their business continues being productive. They're still trading. They're still making profits. And the mind shift in just a couple of months has been phenomenal. Whereas back in December, no chance was it going to happen. 6 months later, it's like, okay, let's look at this whole pandemic thing when it's over. Let's look at how we can work from home. Let's look at how we can perhaps have staff. And there's major implications around how this will work. What do our houses look like? What do our cities look like? Transportation, costs, office blocks. Those corporates in their giant head offices dotted around our country, suddenly they don't need all that space, perhaps. Maybe if people are working from home, productivity can be there, and there are exceptions. Quick point, the Shopify CEO was on record. He put his entire team home, and we sent them home, and he sent everyone home. And his key point is, he says, the problem is you got to be very careful of a blended environment where some people work at home and some at the office. And either if it's a permanent split or sort of rotational split, he says you either got to be 100% remote or 100% in the office. And his logic is quite simple, that if you've got a blended approach, the people who are at home working do suffer. They miss out the water cooler talk, so to speak. You go into a meeting, and before it starts, there's a little bit of chit chat, and sometimes there's a brainwave that comes out of that. You bump into someone in the car park or the cafeteria or the escalators or something, and suddenly a thought comes. And therefore, the remote workers, if there's a work at the office team as well as a remote team, and if it's a sort of a merged team but split geographically, that becomes a significant challenge. And so Shopify is saying, that's it. We're just, we're going home and we're not coming back. Google was talking around coming back in July. They're now saying September. Facebook is saying, later this year. Twitter's saying, what, if you don't want to come back, that's fine. At this point, no staff are returning. And we're going to see that evolution. We're going to see that change as it happens. And I think we're going to get the blended. I think there will be a few companies brave enough, Shopify one of them, to say it's 100% work from home. I think most companies are going to do that blend. And if you're part of the remote, you've got to be cognizant of the fact that you are missing out on some of the process and the environment and opportunity, brainstorming, et cetera, et cetera. And you've got to make design plans to make that work. And of course, it's hard for some members of staff and some businesses. Women with kids at home, low skilled. I mean, if you're low skilled, it's nigh impossible. Manufacturing. I mean, there's lots of spaces where the work from home doesn't work. There's lots there it does. In tech, it absolutely does. A lot of financial services, it absolutely does. A lot of it doesn't. Manufacturing, construction, etc. And some home environments just aren't conducive to it. And it's why we're trying to get schools open around the world, I imagine, is because, unless the schools are open, people can't go back to work. And it messes with productivity if you're trying to be a work from home and manage kids and teach them and be a homeschool teacher all at the same time. Essentially trying to do 3 or 4 jobs, and truthfully, all of them suffer in the process. One of the key things is out of office face-to-face meetings are just dead. I got invited to a meeting in Sandton, and I'm like, I'm never going to a meeting in Sandton ever again in my life. To what purpose? A 30 or 40-minute meeting can take 2 hours of my life with, making sure you arrive on time, parking, traffic, getting out, finding your car, paying, etc., etc. It's like, no, there's Zoom. Now, does it mean I'll never go back to Sandton? No, of course I will. The JSC's there. One day we'll have power hours back at the JSC in Sandton. Not this year, maybe next year, maybe not. But, and if you're inviting me to a fancy lunch at one of those nice steakhouses with lots of red wine, well, then I'm there. But don't expect me to go to Sandton for a meeting. Don't expect me to go anywhere for a meeting. We've broken that habit. And yeah, there's going to be pushback on it. Ditto conferences. Do conferences still exist? Yeah, of course they will. But we're going to rethink the conferences. I mean, webcasts. So I've been doing just power hours now since 2011. We've always done a physical event, Durban, Cape Town, Johannesburg, and a webcast event at the same time. And truthfully, the physical event was always the core. And there's some niceties to it. I love this. I'm presenting it from my home. It means I have no fight with traffic. If it wasn't for COVID, we would all be in Sandton right now. And I would have had to have fought traffic and get there early and set up and hope I didn't leave something back at home and etc. But suddenly we're realizing that this tech does work. And yes, it's different. Make no mistake. A webcast is different to an in-person event on numerous different levels. But we've learned that those differences don't make it impossible. Some of them are challenges. Some of them are perks. I mean, for example, here, anyone can raise a hand. Sometimes in a live setting, someone's just too timid, too shy. You're sitting behind a large person and I can't see your hand coming up, or that sort of thing. So, I mean, two of the big things, meetings, over. I mean, like face-to-face meetings, man, you've got to have a really, really solid reason. And that should be a good steak and a great bottle of wine. Like 2 or 3 great bottles of wine. And conferences, yeah, but they're going to have to be really special for me to trudge out, and particularly think global conferences. The FT do a series of global conferences around the world. They've canned it. They're doing them webcasts, and it just works better. And attendances are significantly higher, and I can vouch for that. We're getting record attendances at our webcasts. The technology is there. Now, I've been doing webcasts since 2008, 2009, when I was working at the Blue Bank, and the tech is not new. The tech is now absolutely perfect. So work from home will have impacts on where we live. If you're working from home and you're 100% remote, you can now live anywhere. Yeah, absolutely. And that's especially outside, cities, expensive cities. Now, San Francisco, I was just reading before I came on an article how rents have gone down by double digits in San Francisco. No, double digits, 11, 12%. Partly people losing jobs, but also partly being told, you don't have to work from home. So why live in an expensive city? So maybe you want to be in Cape Town, but you need to live in Cape Town. Now, at the moment, you're fighting traffic, but instead you could go and live, I don't know, Stellenbosch or Wellington or something like that. I could be living in Durban. One of my biggest reasons for saying I had to stay in Johannesburg was events, but TV. Except that I've done my TV show every week since 27th of March, but I haven't been into a studio. I've done it via Zoom technology. Is it the same as what it was? No. We're adapting, we're changing it. And that has significant implications all over the place in terms of where we live, how we live, what we're doing. I mean, we need different space requirements. If you're working from home, maybe that spare room now becomes an office. Maybe you need a slightly bigger place. But maybe the bigger place, instead of living in Houghton, Johannesburg, you can boogie off and go live in Magaliesburg, get a slightly bigger place. It's probably going to be cheaper and a better quality of life. I think storage is going to be interesting. I think we're going to start to think, hang on, and I'm going to come back to it when I talk around leisure and the like, but I think storage is an issue as well, where it's a case of, okay, hang on a second. Let's get smarter about how we live in our house. And the best examples, for example, New York, where it snows half the year. During the snowing period, you want your snow skis, but during summer, you send them off to storage. So housing in cities are going to have huge implications. Transport. If I'm traveling less to work, and I've done, I haven't worked in an office in a decade, so I don't travel much as it is. Sort of driving in my car and the like. I used to fly a lot. In fact, I've probably flew a heck of a lot more than, in fact, undoubtedly. But less travel. And that has implications for vehicle sales. It has implications for energy companies. It also has implications for maybe Uber and car rental. Do we start seeing more one-car families? Which means when you need the second car, you Uber. And when you go, and then it comes down to, I drive a two-seater Roadster. I love it. It's huge amounts of fun. And sometimes it's impractical. When I want to go to Pilanesberg and game viewing, you don't want to do that in a little two-seater drop top. I mean, that's not. So what do? I rent a car for a weekend. So those sort of changes are going to start coming through. And this is the impact that work from home. And we don't need 100% of the workforce to be at home for these impacts to start to happen. You can see suddenly, do you need so much office space? Do we need so much living space, apartments in the major centers, Joburg, Cape Town, New York, San Francisco, London, etc. So the list goes on. People can move out into the suburbs. They can move out into the villages. We can go live in different countries. Your challenge ultimately becomes, time zones more than anything else. And then that free time. And what do we do with that free time that we're saving from the not traveling? If you're in a major city, your commute is quite possibly an hour or two a day that you're spending in that commute. And you've probably, you listen to podcasts. Certainly when the hard lockdown started, we saw podcast listenership initially spike and then drop off as people weren't commuting. But what do you do with that extra time? Chasing experiences instead. Now the challenge is, don't work. Don't now give your boss 14 hours a day. That's not the answer. Suddenly we've got that extra time. We can now start to do things. It's why I referenced storage. Hobbies, I think, is going to be one of the things. And I know hobbies is the weirdest word, but perhaps we're actually going to start having time for hobbies. Because at the moment, certainly, I already worked from home, but my life was just a sort of a mill of one after the other and cluttered with meetings. My lockdown life is busier. I'm getting more done, but I'm also getting a whole lot more free time in the process. Office space, of course, simply less required. And to rethink the office space as well. And I'm thinking of a post-COVID world. So I'm not thinking around social distancing and the like. I'm thinking about companies, whether it just be a little 20 or 30, maybe a 50 staff or maybe tens of thousands of staff. Offices are suddenly going to become like, you might still have them, but you certainly don't need as much space. Massive implications for property generally, corporate office space, etc., as well as residential. Retail, look, online is the big winner. Make no mistake about this. South Africa off a very low base. About 1% of our retail sales every year were online. I've heard numbers out there that by May we were starting to hit sort of 4, 5, 6%, and perhaps growing. Lots of potential here locally. Bad news for shopping malls. We already have an oversupply of shopping malls, but I'm buying. I bought jeans online the other day. I mean, I could have gone to the shop, but I don't want to put myself. I know exactly the jeans I want. Basically, I'm wearing a pair, and I just want 2 more like this pair. So I find the supplier, I check the size on the jeans, and I buy 2 pairs, and they get shipped to me. The online shopping experience has got a lot to improve, particularly with some of the South African experiences. I've had some fairly less than great ones, but there's a lot of scope in that space, and that's really bad for shopping malls. We take it a step further, we see small mom and pops going out of business. Who's going to replace them? I also think that the big retailers are going to start re-looking. Traditional large retailer, they will adapt. They've got the technology, they've got the cash, they've got they can adapt. But I think even they're going to be looking more online. Woolies online, Pick and Pay online, the Checkers 60/60 app, suddenly just exploding. 60/60 only arrived in my area on Monday. I haven't been able to use it because every time I log on, it's like, oh, nope, sorry, we're full, come back tomorrow type of scenario. Whereas when it initially launched in Bryanston, I know people who lived in Bryanston, they could log on whenever they liked. Microsoft has said they saw 2 years of acceleration basically happen in April. And the same in online. I think the large traditionals can adapt very well to the online space. And I think the implication of that is in store, we'll see smaller ranges. We'll see smaller stores and perhaps smaller store footprints, number of stores as well. Now, how many Woolies, Pick and Pays, Dis-Chems, etc. do you need if I can actually just sit in my house and go click, 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 order and have it delivered? So retail is going to be a big win, and I think traditional large retail will broadly manage through it. It's going to be tough as they change. They'll change it. Mom and pop stores, they're going to absolutely struggle. Many of them have closed because they just don't have the access to bridging finance. They don't have the access to the holding them over the period of zero income. They can move online, but I think they need to be niche and they need to be effective. How do you beat Woolies? Well, you sell something that Woolies doesn't have and hope they don't copy it. Or you sell something which Woolies does have, or in the space of Woolies, but you do it better. You make it more niche. You make it, I'm going to talk a lot about hyper-local. You make it more hyper-local. You personalize the experience, something which a big corporate such as Woolies is really, really going to struggle with doing. Karen, with the drop in shopping mall usage and the huge drop in SA property ETFs, are they going to recover, sell, take loss? So I've got some property ETFs, South Africa and global. I haven't sold. I haven't bought more. It's going to be a long, hard road back for them. At the end of the day, the quality ones will get rid of their sort of B and C grade malls, and I don't know who they're going to get rid of them to. What do we use them for? Schools, maybe. That was an idea Keith McLachlan threw out this morning when I was chatting with him. What do we do with them? Ultimately, they're going to recover, but it's going to be a long road back. Make absolutely no mistake about that. So, but here's the thing, and I talk about experiences. Hard local, we didn't find joy in the things, even as we were surrounded by them. We missed the experiences, beaches, bars, bowling, biking, barbers, and I'm only touching on the Bs there, and not even all of the Bs. Our lives, and I speak broadly, the royal we. Our lives pre-lockdown were this mad scramble to own things and to have things and to present ourselves in a certain way. And it's the cliches, keeping up with the Joneses or the Nglovels, the fancy cars and houses and everything else. And when we were locked down, what did we miss? We missed the stuff that in some cases was really cheap, just going and having a beer with a friend in a bar, going to a beach and being warm, getting a haircut. So my haircuts are sorted. I bought some clippers. My wife is going to be a brilliant haircutter by the end of the year. So far she's doing styling, just going for a bike ride, bowling, whatever it might be. Those are what we missed. We missed the experiences. And there's been a move already to experience over owning. We've seen it from the millennials. We've seen it from the Generation Zs. Experience has been gaining ground versus the having things. Forget having things. Forget, and it comes, I think, the reason the millennials and the Generation Zs is they saw their parents, the boomers, predominantly the boomers, but who worked immensely hard and did incredibly well. They really did. And they came out, their parents were out of the war, the Second World War. And the boomers of the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, even back into the 60s, they really, really did well. But they worked immensely hard. And at the end of it, they had things to show for their hard work. But they lacked experiences. They hadn't done stuff. Yes, they'd been on a holiday to Greece or, Disneyland or something like that. But it was more about sort of, hey, here's what I've got and I can show you as opposed to what you've done. And this, I think, the pandemic has absolutely changed that to where experiences become way more important than owning. Lockdown, pandemic made the things we own less attractive and made us realize what we do miss and what does matter. This is going to have massive implications in how we are going to manage. Leisure and entertainment is going to be more about the shared and the lived experience than it is going to be, about, I went to I don't know, Ibiza or whatever the case is. Eating out. We're going to see a lot less restaurants because a whole bunch just aren't going to survive. And I think there's going to be, structural unemployment. But the restauranting is going to be better and they're going to rethink their experience. They're going to rethink their menu because part of that restaurant experience is going to be Uber Eats. I can order Uber Eats in some of my favorite restaurants, but their menu was constructed, and I'm not dissing them for it. Of course it was. Their menu was constructed for a sit-down experience, not to be put into a container into the back of a motorbike and driven 10 or 15 minutes to my house. I think menus are going to get rethought. I think dark kitchens where you don't even have a sit-down space. No, I can't remember the restaurant in Rosebank, Marble. He's just said, I'm not opening. He says, I'm not reopening my restaurant under current regulation because the restaurant is a complete experience, and I can't do that complete experience, so we're not even going to try. So restaurants and eating out is going to be fundamentally different. Online is going to start facilitating, but I think it's going to start moving into the background, much as it does with an Uber Eats or an Uber. Online is still critically important, but it's going to shift into the background. And I think luxury becomes so early 2000s, that swanky, expensive watch on your arm that you bought from an overpriced Richemont store. It's back to experience. Experience, I think, is going to be work from home and experience are going to be two of the biggies. And that then brings us to leisure. CEO and founder of Airbnb is on record as saying travel may never be the same again. In the immediate, of course it isn't, but even longer term. He's talking about holidays closer to home, drive to destinations versus flying, in-country versus foreign destinations, less congested holidays, game parks over resorts, standalone accommodation over holidays. Now, this is in part an immediate response to COVID, but again, it's longer term. If it's more about experience, isn't it more important that our family's there? In which case, sure, some can take an entire family to Disney World, but for a lot of folks, it's like, look, we can't go to Disney World, but we can get a really, really great place for an extended family out in Magaliesburg or down in Clarence or Durban or Wellington or whatever the case may be. And I think if we take that, it's going to be more about experience versus owning. I think those experiences come into the leisure industry at the same time. And if we have more leisure time, we need to spread our budget a little bit further at the same time. And it becomes, it's no longer just a case of, well, I get 2 weeks leave, let me go to Disneyland for 2 weeks. And I don't know why I'm picking on Disneyland, but nonetheless, let me go to Disneyland for 2 weeks. It's about, well, hang on a second. I don't want just 2 weeks. I want 10 weeks of leave a year. I've been, since I left working for a corporate, I take a week's holiday 4 times a year. In fact, that's not true. Take a week's holiday 3 times a year, and I take a month over Christmas. So I run at 7 weeks holiday a year. And I think we're going to start seeing that move to that. But then your budget has to stretch further. Hence, more local, more in-country, less crowded. And then hyperlocal. Manuel Castells, my wife introduced me to him in the late 90s. He wrote a number of books. The Information Age Trilogy is what I'm talking about, 96, 7, and 8, a book a year over 3 years. And he talked around how the internet removed time and geography, my words, not his. And the biggest example of that for me was in the 80s as a kid. I used to play correspondence chess. So you would literally write a postcard and send it to someone. The problem was postcards and letters, there was a cost associated. So I didn't do much of it. And then, I played at school and in the 90s, I stopped playing chess. I just, it's where do you find the time? Where do you find someone to play against? And then a website popped up, which I play chess on, and it's not the one on the screen now, but I play online chess. I can be playing 200 games of chess at a time. Got 3 weeks to make my move. It removed the fact that I could do it online, removed time and geography. It didn't matter that I'm playing with someone in Russia or someone in America or in some cases, someone just in Santon. The time and the geography was removed. I logged on when I had some spare time. I made my moves. The next person, they then logged on. They saw that they had some moves. They made their moves. Suddenly the internet made everyone our neighbor, because it totally removed that time and geography. And then what started to happen was the internet started to bring local back again, because although everyone was my neighbor, I didn't know them. The person I'm playing chess with, I know them as an avatar. I know them as a handle, a name on the internet. I don't know who they are. There might be a slight bio. Sometimes you'll chat in a chat group. I'm not a very chatty chess player. So they're my neighbor, but I don't know who they are. And Uber Eats and Uber kind of brought that local back to a degree and said, actually, your neighbor is your neighbor, but they're anonymous. We still don't know our driver in an Uber. We have a great driver. We don't know how to get them again. Smartphones connects local to each other. But what I think we're going to start getting is absolutely hyper-local, where, yes, the internet broke time and geography. And as I said, it facilitates, but it's going to start perhaps shifting into the background. The fact that we're sitting on amazing technology we couldn't have dreamed of 40 years ago to do this webcast is in the background. That no one's thinking about the wowness of the fact of 200 people sitting in 200 different parts of the country, all listening to me present from my living space. I mean, and that local, that supporting the community. We can use online tools. And why do we start to move to hyperlocal? because of the experience. I buy my bread from a Volvatello partly because they make the best bread. I really, really like it. It's an affordable bread, but it's also the supporting of my community. I will buy butter from my deli. It's not as cheap as the butter from a Pick and Pay or something, but it's supporting him. And we'll use the online tools. But I think it's going to become a lot more of that hyper-local, facilitated by the internet. And I give you an example of Uber Eats. I don't know that Uber Eats survives because they're taking 30% from a restaurant, and that's a big slice. The problem is that when lockdown happened, the restaurants didn't know how to communicate with us. Your favorite restaurant or bar or whatever the case is, when you walked in, the staff knew who you were. But how did they know how to contact you? Did they have your name? Did they have your mobile number? In some cases, yes, but in many not. And I think we're going to start seeing that. I think we're going to start seeing restaurants, bars, and other, across, hairdressers, everyone suddenly saying, hang on a second, I need to have a direct relationship with the individual who's coming into my establishment, or maybe who I'm delivering that dinner to or something like that. Hence the move towards hyperlocal. And then borders. Borders are going to become harder. And I mean hard in that harder to get through, especially if unemployment remains elevated. I think that's likely. I'm going to touch on that. Immigration is going to be harder, even for skilled workers. Countries are going to sink into themselves, into nationalism in a sense. Food security. Both in what a country grows and trades. For example, South Africa's massive wheat and maize producer, and then when Zimbabwe has a drought or something, their crop failure, we sell to them. That pushes the price up in South Africa because it pushes up demand. Now, sometimes we have record crops and then we've got excess, but suddenly it's going to be a case of countries are going to look at, hang on a second, food security. First, let's make sure we've got enough. And then we can start to look beyond that. Farmer security in terms of drugs. So when the pandemic broke out and it turned out the US don't manufacture N95 masks. Yes, it's owned by 3M. Yes, 3M have the patent. Yes, 3M is an American company. They don't produce them in America. And the concern was, well, tell your factory wherever to ship them to us. There were reports during April of shipments of masks and the like, just frankly being sort of hijacked at airports, and not hijacked by gangs of thugs, hijacked by governments and health departments and the like. The reports out this morning about US wants to buy 3 months global supply of remdesivir, and I've pronounced that badly too. They're trying to secure their stockpile. Remember when the drug came out that aspirin has that can be used and it can help with critically ill COVID-19 patients. The first statement from our government was, woohoo, we have 300,000 or was it 30,000 units in country and we can produce another 300,000 by the end of the year. This wasn't about how great are we and hello world, come buy from us. The story out of our health department, Dr. Zweli and Kizi, was all about what do we have in country and what can we build in country. Borders are going to become hard. And that's partly why I now say travel is going to start to become local rather than distant. It's going to be harder to get through the borders. Supply chains, they're going to become more simplified. Just in time crashed during lockdown and in part still struggling. And I've used the example of the iPhone before. 30 components from 15 different countries from 30 different factories. The problem's quite simple. If you've got 29 of those components, but the 30th factory is still in lockdown because of a positive COVID-19 case, now what? You can't make that iPhone. So I think that move is also going to be to local supply chains contracting inwards. That's going to increase cost. Why is an iPhone made in Foxconn in China? Well, because they can do it cheap and best. And if iPhones were made, for example, in America, it would cost more money. I think we're going to start to say, well, okay, and this comes back to my hyperlocal. So, yeah, it's going to increase costs, but also increase employment. If your iPhone's been made in America instead of Foxconn, it means there's jobs in America. If we're making our masks locally instead of importing, if we're growing our food, it's going to make it more local. Tech goods are harder, but it's not impossible. Some tech. Truthfully, anything can be made anywhere, but tech needs to really happen on a scale. A lot of things need to happen on a scale, but with supply chains contracting, particularly in a hyperlocal world, especially in a world where borders are becoming harder, what we're going to start to see, I suspect very much, is the contracting of the supply chain. It will push costs, will improve employment, and it will help communities. So then to employment. I mean, surely a long road back to pre-pandemic levels. I mean, some businesses are just gone for good. Some businesses are operating with less. They had to retrench or fire a couple of staff, and they realized, well, we can still do this. This isn't so bad. And of course, technology reducing need for as much staffing. When I do an event like this and I do it physically at a venue, that requires a team of people. There needs to be sound people. There needs to be a whole bunch of people. And it depends on the venue I'm using, but some of the venues, there are 3 or 4 people, 5 or 6 who are involved in the process of the event. Suddenly you use technology and it's me here with a light and a video, a laptop, and we're off to the races. And we saw ADP number out of the US today. It was a miss. It was about 2.4 million. The market expected 3 million jobs created. But it still suggests that unemployment in the US is probably at about 13%. Peaked at 16 and change. But I think there's going to be structural unemployment, much as we've had in South Africa. But I think, are we going to get back to unemployment in the US at sub 5%? I think it's going to be years and years and years and years and years for that to happen. And that then, low levels of spending, and we're going to see staffing easily cut, technology replaces. We're going to see side hustles become more important to the individuals. And that goes back again to my hyperlocal. And that side hustle might be because your hours are cut, maybe your job is cut, maybe you were a 2-income family and now you're a 1 or 1.5 income family. I know some people are saying, well, hang on a second, we're now a 1.5 income family instead of a double income family, and the kids are at home. Why don't we homeschool instead of, do the traditional schooling thing? We start getting clever like that. So side hustles, wine dealer, Keith McLaughlin and I want to buy 20 cases of a good wine, stick it in his garage, and over the next 3 years we'll drink it and the rest we'll sell it at 2 or 3 times the cost. And I've done this before. And the point is that you basically sell it to restaurants. They don't have the storage, they don't have the cash flow. We can use those two to our advantage. Drive-ins in your garden, your local park. If a friend of my colleague, Christia, she's doing a drive-in in her garden. She's doing a tester. So, got some simple kit audio through the radio in the car. Take 15 cars. You could use a local park. Schools could do it. Now, post-COVID, we can go back to the movies, and to a degree we will, but it comes back to experiences. Driving is fun, it's entertaining. We can take our own food, we can drink some wine or some beer or something. Although, as someone said to me today, can I Uber there because I want to Uber home so I can drink? There's a chap I follow on Facebook who, beginning of lockdown, started how to make sourdough yeast, and now he's selling sourdough bread. Is he going to retire and become a sourdough baker? Probably not. But he's selling at $50 a pop. He's on par with the Woolies price, but it's fresh, it's local, and it's a side hustle for him, and it can make him some cash there. So I think we're going to start seeing a lot of that starting to happen in terms of side hustles picking up. And a part of the point of side hustles is their hobbies. So my hobby is drinking red wine. So the idea of buying 20 cases, of course, that makes perfect sense. If baking was your hobby, well, now your hobby becomes your side hustle, becomes your hyperlocal, and it all starts to click together. Excuse me. So some winners and losers, and they're going to be a lot. The hyperlocal, I think, is going to be a big winner. Shoppings, holidays, experiences, family, the ability to live rural, a sense of, and I didn't see it, I got to be honest, as much as I thought I would, but suddenly a sense of, hang on a second, almost a care for your neighbors, which perhaps didn't exist as much pre-lockdown. And part of that care might frankly have been totally altruistic, and that you were worried, did they have COVID and could they spare you a bottle of wine? But it certainly, is starting to happen, starting to see that happen. Our shopping is going to be hugely different in terms of what we buy, in terms of what matters to us, in terms of how we shop, online versus large retail stores and the like. Online's the obvious winner. I said right up front, that's third slide of this presentation. Imagine this pandemic, this lockdown without the internet, both in terms of shopping, both in terms of working. Online is going to be absolutely humongous. And that's partly the tech giants. So that is the tech giants such as, for example, the Microsofts and the Zooms and the Amazons. The Naspers and their Tencent. So certainly it's going to be that, but it's more than that. It's what it facilitates, and that's what I spoke about a moment ago. What Uber did was just facilitate, and particularly Uber Eats. I mean, we had Mr. Delivery in South Africa. We've had it for ages. It was never a great experience. It always seemed to be overly expensive and take too long, and they nickeled and dimed you and stuff. And now it's just become absolutely seamless. And Mr. Delivery's got an app that's on par with Uber. But if I think back 20 years to when I lived in Botchers Hill, when I got my pizza delivered, I phoned the Pizza Hut down literally at the bottom of the hill, spoke to the husband or the wife who owned and ran the place, and and then he would drive up the hill and knock on my door and deliver my pizza to me. And when I first moved to Joburg, same scenario. There was a little place around the corner, and I think, and it's a huge challenge for the businesses. But it's a challenge that if they can get it right, it becomes more personal and it becomes more hyperlocal. Family, friends, free time, I think that's going to be, if we do this right, I think this becomes a big winner from it. It comes back to, what did we miss in lockdown? We missed a beer with our friends. We missed a lunch with our family on a Sunday, that sort of thing. And yes, we could Zoom. My sister and her kids are in Durban. So my wife, myself, my sister and her 2 kids, we do Friday lockdown dinners. And we've done one every Friday evening since the 27th of March. Now, truthfully, as a result of that, we've spent more time interacting during lockdown as a group than we have normally, because how often do one of us get to the other one's city, et cetera, et cetera. But equally, truthfully, it's not the same. I mean, it's just not the same. It's great, and yes, you chat to people more often, but it's not exactly 100% what we're looking for, and that's why I think that personal is going to take a big one. Leisure, smaller, local, more experiential. The experiential is going to be huge. We're going to see significant winners there. We're going to see significant losers there. Your big resorts, etc. Yes, but I think they're going to find it tougher to go through. I think international destinations, yes, but I think a lot more local, a lot more holidaying in country. I've for a decade. I'm trying to think when last I did an overseas holiday. My logic's quite sound. If I've got a week or 10 days for me to go to Europe or the US or Asia or wherever for a holiday, it's 2 to 3 days of travel time, which eats into my holiday. The travel time's terrible and horrible. It can be expensive. It's just so much easier to whiz down to many parts of Southern Africa. Maybe it's Namibia, maybe it's Durban, maybe it's Islamingisa up in the north coast of KZN, whatever it might be. Depending how you like your holidays, we've got it in country. Social justice, this has become interesting. And I'm not here talking as much, Black Lives Matter has obviously come up and been all over the press, but I'm talking more than just that. I'm talking around the whole concept of understanding that how we look at people and how we perceive value. And the key point is people who've been having to look, you've got 2 people who work in a company. One of them is having to look after their kids at the same time and the other isn't. And that's fundamentally different. And I think we've started to become perhaps a little more aware and acute to that, and the fact that we do care about our communities. Now, I will pay for the slightly more expensive butter from the local deli because I like the guy who owns the deli, and that then goes to help his kids go to school, which keeps them off the streets on a Friday evening, et cetera, and it's good for my broader community space. Losers, they're going to be losers. They're always going to be losers. Office blocks and shopping malls. They're not hyperlocal. There's an oversupply, and there's simply going to be less demand for them. The going to Sandton, whether it's Sandton City or the offices there, whether it be head offices or shared offices, etc., starts to become a question of, yes, but why? I mean, to what point? As I said, you want me to a meeting in Sandton, you bring steak and lots of red wine, and then I will consider it. But property is going to be fundamentally changed. Office parks and shopping malls, fundamentally different. The flip side is we might see an uptick in industrial demand for property, particularly with borders, with manufacturing, some of that coming back in country, that then. Airlines and hotels. So, sometimes the hotels, the right experience, what you're looking for. Airlines, but short haul rather than long haul. Particularly if we start to see supply chains start to contract, we start to see more hyper-local happen, then we need to bring less goods in from Asia, from Europe, from North America. So maybe it's not even just necessarily airlines in terms of me and you sitting on an airplane, but the goods and the storage in the container hold as well. Transportation, less driving to work, shorter supply chains, less demand for energy in that space. One of the Ebola World results yesterday, Hilton Tarrant tweeted about it. They basically, they're going to be going their own budget in Avis, and they're cutting back from what was 150 branches. They've now cut it to around 90, and they're going to cut it down to around 60. They're getting rid of cars. They're going to cut their number of cars by more than half. They're cutting their staffing by half. And this has been a trend already. I travel a lot, and every time I landed in a new city, first thing, Avis, get my car, thank you very much. And then it started being, hang on, get my Uber. Now, truthfully, sometimes it was actually cheaper to rent an Avis car for 300 Rand for the day than do my Uber trips, which end up costing 500 or 600. But it also comes down to convenience. You know, whilst I'm in an Uber, I can do something. When I'm driving. It's what my focus is. Transportation is going to be fundamentally changed. As I said, statement assets such as luxury goods and the like, if we're moving to an experiential society, that, if anything, gets frowned upon. In cities are not going to disappear. Cities are not going to die, but cities might start finding it tougher. And I use, again, the San Francisco example I mentioned earlier, where rentals are down. That means the rentals are down because there's less tenants, because tenants have either moved out because they've lost jobs, or they moved out because they can work remote. But that then has implications for cities in terms of their revenue. So, you know, cities are going to struggle. Now, cities have benefits. I love living in Joburg. I mean, I want to get back to Durban, but I know that I will miss Joburg. And I've lived here now 13 years and still love the vibe of a city. I love the range of a city. I love what I can get from a city. But, you know, they're expensive, and they're dirty, and there's all sorts of drawbacks to them, and they've got more crime and all of that sort of thing. And if we working remote, how important do cities become? They're still going to be there, but they're going to certainly come under pressure. And then, of course, one of the winners, and I mentioned it on the previous slide, I'm not going to go back, winners could be rural areas. There's a lot of rural towns where everyone sucked out and went to the city. Suddenly we might start seeing people come back into those rural areas. So the three biggies, as I link them together, it's remote work, it's hyperlocal, and it's experience. And we're going to see those three, I think, play out. And they feed into each other in 2 degrees. If we're remote working, we could go live in Smithsdale rather than have to live close to Sandton or Cape Town City Centre, or wherever it is our offices. So suddenly then that hyperlocal becomes even more important. And then experiences become that much more critical. So I think the big moves is going to be that remote work, the hyperlocal, and experiences are going to be the big drivers. And you know, I've prophesized, I've thrown out ideas of exactly how. Truthfully, in 10 years' time, when I look at it, it might be fundamentally different. But this is how I expect broadly what those trends are. The end date we'll find out in time. And there's going to be a pushback because change is scary. Uncertainty is scary, albeit certainty is a myth. If 2020 has taught us anything, certainty is a lift. But as individuals, we want our old lives back, but we can have better ones. Corporates want their old profits back, but they can have better profits and better products. The fear of change is real, but change which has been forced on us, and we would frankly rather it wasn't. I mean, no one's saying, well, pandemic, we can have some great outcomes. No one's saying that. But we find ourselves in this space, and it's a case of we've been handed an opportunity. And what that then plays to is, what's the future that we want? And that's, how do we manage the pushback? We manage the pushback by saying, well, how would we prefer our life to be? So the first thing we want is, please no pandemic. Let's get rid of the COVID-19. But dream it and do it. And what I mean is zoom out. So what would you like your life and your broader community and family's life and your work environment and your relationships, what would you like them to look like in 5 or 10 years? And dream big. There are no constraints. Don't say, well, I'd like to live here, but I can't because my job is here. No, pretend this is a blank canvas. You can do anything that you want. What do you want your life to look like in 5 or 10 years? How would you like it to happen? And what's important, excuse me, and I've spoken about this often, which is if you're not driving that change, in 5 or 10 years, your life is exactly as it is now, except maybe you hate it even more. So zoom out to 5 or 10 years and then zoom back to now and say, what change can I make today that helps me on that road to 5 or 10 years' time? And it might be, so for example, I said, your problem is you want to live in a rural area, but you need to do whatever, and your job is in Johannesburg. Okay, so how do you change that? Well, you speak to your boss, or maybe you reschool yourself and get a new skill set. Maybe you become a Meister baker and you move to a rural area and become the baker or the butcher or the candlestick maker or whatever the case may be. Don't limit yourself by what we can think. Decide, this is what I would like to see. How do I get down that journey? And it's not going to be linear and it's not going to be smooth. But what we have, and it's what I said right up front, that I want to say almost for the first time ever, we have an epoch moment which gives us opportunity like never before. Even scenarios such as dot-com crash, World War II, World War I, the pandemic of 1918. I mean, 9/11, there's been some giant moments. And 9/11 was undoubtedly an epoch moment, but it didn't impact everyone directly, never mind indirectly. I mean, a lot of people, here in South Africa, were we impacted? Yeah, we were, but very, very sort of at the peripherals of the process. If you were living in New York, directly. If you were living in America, very directly. This is something which has touched everyone, and in largely the same way, which is something which I don't know when something like this has happened before. I was digging around the worst year ever, and it turns out to be the year, I think it's 536. There was 2 volcanoes, which meant that the sun didn't shine, so temperatures dropped, crops failed, then a pandemic came, and somewhere between 30 and 50% of the planet died. That's the extreme. We're not at that point, but we're at a point now where of the 8 billion people on planet Earth, most of us have been touched by this pandemic very, very directly. And that means that our acceptance, adherence to the idea around change is suddenly like, well, a whole lot realer. Because what's the one way to manage change? The classic cliche, someone who's, completely out of weight and out of shape and bad health has a heart attack, and suddenly it's like, whoop, next thing you know, they're doing Ironmans and running the Comrades and riding, cycling the Argus and, paddling the doozy because of that single event. Except this time it wasn't one person, it's planet Earth. So that returning to the new normal, we need to fight, we need to know what we want. In closing, a couple of points. This is our epoch moment. And that epoch moment, and if you Google the definition, the epoch means this a point in time which will be referenced back to. For 100 years, maybe more, people, on the previous slide, I talked about, I said, World War II, World War I. In fact, when you say the war, you might, which one is it? Well, it's probably 2, maybe it's World War I. This is our epoch moment. It's been hard and it's not yet over, and the change will continue to be hard, but it is an epoch moment. And how terrible if in 10, 20, 30 years' time, we look back at our epoch moment as a society and we're like, nothing changed. There was some, I'm not saying that everything pre-COVID was bad, not at all. Lots before COVID. The tech I'm using here was good. But let's find those bits that were bad, and let's get rid of them, and let's find the bits that we would prefer, and let's bring them in. Work, leisure, entertainment going to be the biggest changes. The productivity J-curve changes will be slow. They've been fast at the moment, in the immediate. Zoom, suddenly everyone had to know what a Zoom was. Everyone had to know how to work Microsoft Teams and all of those sort of things. There was an immediate. But already you can see that change is incremental. And yes, the big corporates have like, whoa, this work from home actually does work, and some of them haven't yet sent their teams back to the office. They can, but they're saying no, let's not. There's still a spiking pandemic in South Africa. Let's keep it simple right now. But the actual processes that they're going to want to put in place and the measurables and all of that process is going to be hard. Investment trends are going to be slow, but truthfully they're going to be easy to spot. Plus tech-enabled remote is going to be good. Listed property, no. Local, yes. Transport, no. Small leisure, yes. Large leisure, no. We're going to see those trends. We're going to see the companies in the sectors that are struggling. Old school energy, big trouble. Hydrocarbons. New school renewable energy is definitely going to be a significant trend going forward. And those trends are going to come slowly and over the months and years ahead as results come and as companies come out and as companies go bust and disappear and new ones come out of the ashes. Those trends are going to become very clear. The easy ones, the very, very easy ones, is big tech is obviously winners. I think hyperlocal, although that's going to be on a more personal level. I think small leisure. I think the big losers is going to be property, there's going to be transport, and there's going to be large leisure. That is going to happen slower. It's all going to happen. So the big tech was the winner in it, almost immediately, but it's certainly going to play out. And I'll say it again. It's kind of like we've been handed an opportunity, and let's not pass up on it. And let's also be clear that my idea of the future might not necessarily be yours, and that's fine. I've done the presentation. I'm the fortunate one. The camera's pointed at me. I got to put the slides together, so I get to design this around my thought pattern. And there might have been points or slides where you fundamentally disagreed. There might have been things like you're chatting at your screen saying, but Simon, you don't mention this. That's cool. This is not about, it's this way or the highway. It's about sort of merging it together and finding it all. Ladies and gents, I see some questions coming through. I'll jump to those in a moment. Contact details for myself. All the Think Market presentations are on the Just One Lap website. And of course, Think Market details there. 2 more events next week. I'm doing shorting and hedging using derivatives, understanding longs and shorts. And the week after, we're doing managing risk for trading 101. If you are already trading, if you're thinking about starting trading, if you have started trading, if you think you might ever start trading, managing risk is your most important component of the entire thing. Let me take some questions. After a shopping mall, in my experience, most folks are there for the experience. People trapped in tiny townhouses need somewhere to go. Malls just need to make sure they enhance the experience. Arthur, that's a great point. That's an absolutely great point. And maybe it is, so let's run a thought experiment here. Those mom and pop stores and some of the shops closing down, etc., open space. Maybe the shopping malls need to get cleverer with their space and how they use it. And maybe it's not all shops. Maybe it is partly experiences and something. Of course, the other flip to it is the tiny townhouses. Maybe if I could live in Magaliesburg instead of having to live in Johannesburg, and then I can get a big house because the townhouses are expensive. But you make a great point in terms of maybe it's shopping malls need to reimagine what they offer the shopper to attract us in. And they've got things. I mean, absolutely they have. And one of them is movies and, restaurants and stuff like that. My Pick and Pays and Woolies, I couldn't be bothered. I can do that online. But some of it does stick, and it's about that reimagining the future. Great point, Arthur. Adam, a few stocks and sectors included in the winners. So, the easy one, the very easy one, particularly in the tech space, is tech rich. Now, a lot of people go for NASDAQ. I truthfully prefer what's called the S&P Tech Index, which is the 78 stocks in there. But your big heavyweights, and they're only just starting, your Microsofts, your Amazons. In South Africa, we don't have as much, although Bytes UK is going to be listing out of Ultron in the weeks and months ahead. And Bytes UK perfectly plays into this because what is a big part of remote tech? It's things such as security. You've got your staff at home. You need to make sure their networks are secure. You need cloud. Bytes plays into that. I interviewed Ernest Kaplan on Tuesday morning. If you go to MoneyWeb and find my MoneyWeb Now podcast, you get the interview with that. So that's obviously going to be a huge winner. I'm interested in some of the property stocks locally. Sort of hotel and gaming and the like. City Lodge have got some issues with their BEE deal, and they're doing a rights issue for that. But Sun International, the resorts thing is tricky, but I think there might be something there going down the line. Karen, possibly even more CBD degradation. Yes, unless, of course, city planners are clever and smart. But, there certainly is risk in that space. Shane, uncertainty on whether witnessing V or W, U or L, how much firepower cash do you keep at hand to invest? So I actually was chatting with Christia this morning. I'm currently sitting in more cash than I usually do. I usually have a lot of cash, emergency funds and everything else. I've been buying my ETFs. I have been buying some individual stocks in the last week. I bought Purple Group. Their deal with Capitec's a big deal, and I bought Storage. They're a great Royal One business and in a great space there. If it's V-shaped, then we're back. But how do we grow above this? So we're back at where we were, more or less. S&P kind of flat for the year. Top 40 down 2% or so. NASDAQ at all-time highs. I can see bits of it growing, but as a broad global economy, how do we get growth back from here? So if we are V-shaped back at the top, I'm still, I tweeted just before we came on. Bloomberg were reporting, I think it was Goldman Sachs, 40% of America, of cities in America are either clamping down or rolling back their openings. This pandemic is not over by a long way. Brandon, crystal ball time, do residential property prices drop, or do we see larger houses where we can have more? So there are so many moving parts here, Brandon, but I'm quite happy to gaze into a crystal ball. What the heck? So the work from home is interesting, because let's say you might still want to stay in, let's say, Johannesburg as an example, and maybe you want to stay there because you've got family here, maybe your kids are at school, and you say after the kids have left school, etc. So there will be demand for houses. Actually, people are going to say, well, hang on, I'm working from home, we need an extra bedroom for me to work from. Or maybe you can convert a garage or make a hut in the garden or something like that. But that could pick some demand there. But then on the flip side, there will be people who are saying, oh, heck, I'm going to go live in Magaliesburg, I'm going to go live in Smithsdale, etc., etc. I think residential property, medium to long term, is fine. The short term, it's going to be really, really tough, because buying a house requires confidence. And even if your boss is saying, yeah, you can work from home and you need an extra room to work from, you're like, yeah, but do I still have a job come Christmas? So I think, I think we're going to see some in the rest of this year, probably even into next year, we're going to see some significant softening in residential prices. And then I think it'll flatten out and return. And I think what we will see, I think the big winners are perhaps going to be the sort of non-traditionals, your Durbans, your Magaliesburgs, those sort of places are probably going to really good. Questions. Karen, will there be a turn against purchasing Chinese items to support local purchases? There will be, yes. And you say this could affect investing in China ETFs. Yes, but China's a lot, and I do expect it to have implications on China. I worry less about China because it's a command economy. I would worry probably more about some of those American and European multinationals. Possible psychological effects on those people working from home. Reduction in people contact. Absolutely. No, I've worked from home for 10 years. In fact, apart from 4 years at Standard Bank, I've worked from home. I've worked for myself from home my entire life. Well, a year at Stake and Equal and 4 years at Standard Bank. And it is something which we need to be cognizant of. It is too easy, and I'm not even talking under lockdown, just under normal conditions, to go days, weeks without seeing people. And that's why I go back to the hyperlocal. It's why I go back to restaurants and bars. And I think, family and that sort of thing, because it's even more than just Zoom. It is proper good old-fashioned human interaction and touch, which is critically important. Shane, who would I choose between Capitec, Aspen, Sasol, Naspers, Remgro? In a word, probably Aspen. I like Capitec, but I think they're probably fairly valued. Sasol, I don't like. Naspers, yep, 10 cent huge. Remgro, I don't like holding structures. Opinion on trading traditional retailers moving to online grocery deliveries. Who's at the forefront in South Africa currently? So our big online obviously is Takealot, that is owned in large part by Naspers. I think in my experience so far, and anecdotal, I just can't get the Woolies thing to work. Man, it doesn't have my area where I live. I try to sign up for a Woolies card, not a credit card, just a Woolies store card, the one you swipe. And it told me my ID number didn't exist and their support was useless. Woolies apparently have got dark stores, in other words, no foot traffic just for this. Anecdotal experience is ShopRite is 100 miles ahead. And that 60/60 app, everyone I know who's used it has just said it's absolutely excellent. Herbert, any local ETFs well suited for the possible lifestyle changes we face? No, our listed space in terms of lifestyle. There are maybe companies like Long for Life, perhaps one of them. Those sort of companies. Our ETFs locally are very focused either on offshore, and then they fairly sort of broad or geographic, as opposed to sector specific, with a few exceptions. The big one's probably the Nasdaq from Satrix, or the S&P Tech from One Invest. Brandon, new Chinese ETF opinion, horse bolted. Do we look at broader Asia, India, Africa, 20-year horizon? No, China is China is still on the march. China will be the biggest superpower on this planet, maybe not in our lifetimes. China is still on the march. India, Africa following up behind it in time, but the next superpower economically, certainly, maybe even politically, is going to be China. Lots of time left for that. Shane, you've been doing them monthly at this point. We'll see how it goes. There's a couple already on the website. If you go to that address, justonelap.com/thinkmarkets. The first one was May, which was the data so far. The second one was June, which was the matrix and how do we get out of this and how do we invest our way out of it. Something I'd like to do quarterly, monthly, something like that. Head to the events page. You'll see some that way for the events page, you'll see there. Ivor, working from home offers more opportunity in terms of percentage of the space you can make tax deductible, bond interest rates, levies. Yeah, great point. Absolutely, absolutely. And you save on petrol, you know, and you also, I mean, you know, do we need 2-car families if everyone's working at home and that sort of thing? And that's the thing, it's the trickle downs. Now, the money you save tax deductible on bond interest rates, etc. When you sell your house, that subject, say you were claiming back 10% of your, and it's not just rates and taxes, your housekeeper, your gardening service, your security service, 10% of all of it. When you sell the house, that 10% is subject to capital gains. But do you run the math? It usually works. Marsha, any opinions on weighting our investments towards countries who've been able to keep the virus under control, Japan and Australia? Marsha, that's a great point. I hadn't thought of that. So there might be some benefit to it. The challenge is how. So Japan, there's an ETF. Australia, there's get some individual equity there. And obviously you can pick up individual equity positions in Tokyo as well. But two thoughts. Do they get second waves? And the answer is I honestly don't know, and every chance that they don't, but they might. And second question is, in a global environment, is if we're seeing a global recession, they might suffer less, but they're not going to escape unharmed. But I did like that thinking. Adam, China ETF, yeah, I mean, I'm actually interviewing Helena Conradi from Satrix tomorrow. I think it's a great product to bring to market. For me, I'm happy with global, except that my global is only about 3% China. Maybe I am missing out. Sharks rather keep local property ETF exposure lower in just one lap riskier. Yeah. So I buy my ETFs every month, and I haven't been buying the property. I've been keeping that exposure lower. The property is going to be fine at the end, but not everyone fine. Cyril gave us 2 days notice in India, 4 hours. Work from home opportunity for business to externalize cost office space. Exactly. David, you're right. So what happens in that example? So what we're seeing with the big techs, they've given their staff R1,000 stipend, but it's for $1,000, sorry, one-off stipend to make their home office ready in a sense, but it is cheaper for businesses. You know, suddenly they don't need a giant office in Sandton. They might still have an office in Sandton, but it can be a whole lot smaller. It can, you know, and yes, some of the stationery and the like, the staff are going to say, kick us back some of that, but certainly this can be a cost saving for companies as well. Live anywhere with a decent internet connection. David, that's my dream. I mean, all I need is I'm on a fiber 100 at the moment. I can do my TV. I can broadcast live video. Just give me a decent internet connection. We can live absolutely anywhere. Borders audio quality better than most OST webinars. So two things to that, David. One is I'm using Zoom rather than GoToWebinar, and I think Zoom's a bit ahead of the game. And because it's only me on the line, and I've also I'm testing out my new mic. Maybe that's the point as well. Jacques, always a pleasure. Ladies and gents, we're going to park it there. I have run my time. We have families, dinners, and everything else to go to. Everyone, really appreciate your time this evening. Video will be online, let's say, tomorrow morning. Karen, absolute pleasure. Everyone stay safe, wear masks, wash your hands. This pandemic is only starting to spike in South Africa. It's going to get hectic. Chris, Brandon, Jacques, everyone, Shane, everyone keep well, stay safe. Have a good evening. Cheers all.